Good morning, Four Oaks. A Thursday morning. Let's check the date. January 30th, 2025. So glad that you have joined us for this round of our pastoral devotionals. Our practice here is to walk through the passage of Scripture that we're going to be preaching on for that upcoming Sunday. And of course, that means for this week, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Now, we read through the entire text to begin with, and now we are working through it in chunks. So if you haven't been with us, just sort of briefly here, Solomon has been talking about the seasons of life. And seasons for life in Solomonic language are those rhythm cycles of life appointed by God, orchestrated by God, superintended by God, outside the realm of human control. Whether it's living or dying, laughing, crying, speaking, keeping silent, and he goes through a whole litany of these things. These are not things that we as human beings choose to go through. They are seasons of life that God takes us through. And as such, we're not to kick against the goads. We're to submit to those seasons in terms of what they are. Now, Solomon says one of the things that makes it difficult to, or maybe even to say, the thing we have to live in tension with related to the seasons is this idea of eternity, and that God has placed this idea of eternity in our hearts, that because we're made in his image, because God is eternal and we are creatures made like God, there is that sense of knowing that things are not the way they're supposed to be, that we have been created to have an eternal relationship with God, but because of sin and death and misery and suffering, things are not the way they were supposed to be, and that God is in the middle of redeeming that. But in the meantime, we have to figure out how to live in the here and now. But the beauty of Ecclesiastes, and I know some of you have been complaining about Ecclesiastes, you know who you are, is that Solomon is showing us what life under the sun is like, so that we might reach out for, grab hold of the eternal, the fear of God, which is the only thing that can give us any hope in life and death. Now we come to the part where Solomon is going to reflect upon the greatest enemy of all, the most terrible season of all, the thing that humanity lives in fear and dread of, and of course, that is death. And so we're going to spend the next 2 days here this week talking about Solomon's reflections upon not just death, but upon the fact that we have to live with this prospect of death. So let's dig in. We're in verse 16, chapter 3. Moreover, Solomon said, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes down into the earth? So I saw there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? The first thing Solomon reflects upon is not just dying itself. It is the fact that you and I have to live in a world where death is everywhere. And death does not discriminate. Even if we are not dead, and if you're listening to this, guess what? You're not dead. The reality is you're dying, and I'm dying. Paul says, outwardly we are wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day. And Solomon brings up one of the most difficult pieces of this idea that we are carrying around in our own bodies, the sentence of death. Look back at verse 16 and 17. He says, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. So if you're a true crime aficionado like myself, you might be watching a special, listening to a podcast. And one of the things that can infuriate me the most is when the guilty get off, right? When those who have committed treachery, murder, lies, deceit, have destroyed people's lives, get off on a technicality. Or maybe some judge or prosecutor loses their mind. Maybe some juror or jury is sort of run away and loses their way and ends up pardoning what is obvious to all the rest of us, right? That this person is in fact guilty. That's what this is talking about. I saw under the sun, that means apart from God, in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And even in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. So not only does this happen on a global scale or a societal scale, but it can also happen on a personal scale. That those who may not in our eyes, or even in the eyes of God, quote unquote, deserve something. The reality is in this life, sometimes the wicked flourish. Sometimes evil people get their way. Sometimes people escape the hangman's noose. I was reminded of this, of course, back during the O.J. Simpson trial. And what was particularly difficult about watching that whole saga unfold, which it did really over a course of 30 years, was the plight of the Goldman family. Of course, and you remember the Goldmans, their son Ron Goldman was one of the ones that they found at the murder scene along with Nicole Brown Simpson. And to see that family's anguish in knowing that the killer of their son had been acquitted, had been pardoned. For them, it was not theory, right? It was reality. And while most of us don't have to deal with an injustice on that level, all of us have to deal with what we kind of call micro injustices, right? Where someone is promoted ahead of us at work, even though they were not deserving. Or someone gave someone else a political favor, and now they have a job and we don't have a job. It's someone's political connections that enable them to send their kid to this school and not to that school. It could even be just on the most basic level of being misunderstood in an argument or a conflict in a relationship. It can be being falsely accused of something. It can be being misunderstood. All of these things, Solomon says, are a result of living in a fallen world. And if life is only lived under the sun, then we have really no hope. We really do need to throw up our hands and say it really doesn't matter how we live then, whether we treat others well or mistreat others well. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But then Solomon reminds us of something. Verse 17, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. You see, even though this book is a grim book in many ways, because it tells the truth about who we are apart from God, it also continually pulls us back into right alignment by understanding that if life lived under the sun is hopeless, life lived under God is full of hope. And the writer, Solomon, reminds us at some point And in some time and in some season, guess what? God will judge the wicked. Now, he's also going to judge the righteous, okay? Which should which should catch us short, right? Because really easy to think about the injustices committed against us, and that God will judge the wicked. But we have to remember that God will also judge us, that all come under his gaze, which is simultaneously terrifying, but also of great relief. And we also have to recognize that this season that God judges may not be this season. It may not be a future season in this life. It might be at the throne of judgment. We ultimately don't know. But because we know God doesn't wink at sin, because we know God doesn't wink at injustice, we know that all these things matter to him. And he is going to take care of everything, right every wrong, at its correct time. Now, how in the world does God do that? Does he do that simply by overlooking sin? Does he do that by simply sweeping sin under the rug? Oh, no. He does this because of Jesus. Jesus comes, who was righteous, who was in the place of justice, and suffered wickedness, suffered unrighteousness, suffered unfair treatment, but yet took our unfairness, our wickedness, our unrighteousness upon himself so that God could treat us as we don't deserve. See, none of us deserve mercy. None of us deserve grace, which should temper our responses, should it not, when we observe an injustice to say, wow, I see myself in that. Wow, by the grace of God, I want to avoid that. Yes, that's human nature. I've been tempted in that way as well. Solomon says, be reminded of the fact that God is the one who is over all of these things. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for today. Tomorrow, we'll get into this last piece about us being like animals, and what does Solomon mean by that? And what kind of conclusion is he drawing about death? And what does that mean for the afterlife? Stay tuned. See you tomorrow. Lord, thanks for this time. And Lord, we are confident that you are going to take care of everything, every wrong, every injustice, Lord, you have got in the palm of your hand. And the reason that you can rectify these things is because of Jesus. We thank you for him, and